John Carver had lived too many lives for a single man. He was born on Earth, in a quiet farming town that the war would one day erase from the maps. As a boy, he thought the stars were distant lanterns, beautiful but unreachable. As a man, he learned the truth. Those lanterns hid enemies, wars, and the endless hunger of empires that saw humanity as prey. He had been only 19 when the draft came for him, and from that day onward, he was no longer John Carver the farm boy. He was John Carver the soldier. For 20 years, he fought on worlds that never knew his name. He fought on the frozen ridges of Series 9, where the air could strip the flesh from bone in seconds. He fought in the jungles of Torah, where the enemy's shrieks never stopped echoing through the dark even after their bodies were gone. He fought on shattered moons, aboard burning starships in cities that were reduced to dust before his very eyes. And through it all he survived, even when the brothers and sisters beside him did not. Survival was its own curse. Each night, he saw faces, his squad mates, his captains, the civilians who had begged for protection. Too many of those faces ended up carved into memorial walls or buried beneath alien soil. He carried their memory like an iron chain around his heart. His chest was heavy with ghosts, and no medal, no speech, no military parade could ever lighten that weight. When the war finally ended, Earth called it victory. Humanity had pushed back the invaders. For the first time in generations, there was peace. Cities began to rebuild. Children played in streets where once there had only been rubble. People cheered, but John Carver did not cheer. For him, victory meant only this: he had survived one more time while others had not. His reward was not joy, it was exhaustion. All he wanted was silence. No more orders. No more screaming. No more alarms in the night. He wanted to rest, not in death but in life. Just a corner of the galaxy where no one asked anything of him. The military offered him exactly that. Not out of kindness, but because they didn't know what else to do with him. He was too old for the new fleets, too haunted for teaching recruits, and too stubborn to accept a medal and fade into obscurity. So they stationed him on a quiet alien frontier, an outpost that barely mattered perched near a forest of glowing trees. His job was simple: watch the skies, monitor the scanners, and file reports if anything unusual appeared. To anyone else, it would have sounded like exile. To John, it was paradise. His days were slow, filled with small rituals. He woke at dawn, made bitter coffee in a dented tin pot, and sat outside to feel the alien sun on his scarred skin. Sometimes he walked the perimeter fence, listening to the strange calls of creatures hidden in the glowing woods. At night, he sat in the guard tower and looked at the stars, not as enemies this time, but as distant, silent lights. Here, finally, he was free. He had no one to command, no one to bury, no one to disappoint. He spoke to no one except the occasional supply officer who visited once a month. Even then, his words were few. He preferred silence. He wanted to feel the weight of his body at rest, the ache of muscles that did not need to fight anymore. And for the first time in decades, he began to think maybe, just maybe, he could live the rest of his days like this, forgotten, but at peace. He had no idea that peace was only the beginning of another story, because the galaxy had not forgotten John Carver. And one night, at the edge of that glowing forest, someone was waiting for him. The forest near the outpost had always felt different. It wasn't hostile, not in the way John Carver remembered hostile worlds. There were no predators circling the perimeter, no acid rains or poisonous spores. Instead, it was alive. At night, the trees glowed faintly, their leaves shining with soft blues and greens like lanterns strung by unseen hands. The air carried strange whispers, the hum of insects that sounded almost like voices. Most soldiers avoided that place. Locals whispered it was cursed. They said spirits lived in those glowing woods, waiting for lost wanderers. John didn't believe in curses or spirits. He believed in rifles, rations, and reports. But sometimes, when the nights grew too heavy and silence pressed too close, he walked by the tree line to clear his head. It was on one of those walks that he saw her. At first he thought the forest was playing tricks, a shimmer of silver between the trees moving like moonlight come to life. He froze, hand drifting toward the old sidearm on his hip. The figure stepped forward, and in the glow of the forest she became clear. She was tall, though not taller than a human woman. Her skin was silver, faintly luminous as if starlight had settled into her veins. Her hair fell in long waves, bright copper that caught the forest glow and turned it into fire. And her eyes were like nothing John had ever seen. Golden, burning, alive with something he could not name. She looked at him as if she had been waiting for years. John's breath caught, though he did not know why. He had faced alien warriors, machines, and monsters without blinking. But the gaze of this girl, no, this woman, made him feel unsteady, like the ground itself had shifted beneath his boots. For a long moment they simply stared at one another. The forest hummed quietly, light drifting around them. Then she raised one hand, placing it over her chest. Her lips parted and her voice came soft but clear, carrying an accent strange to his ears. "You are my life mate." The words struck him harder than any bullet. John blinked, thinking he had misheard. "What did you say?" Her golden eyes never wavered. She repeated it slower this time, as if it was sacred. "You are my life mate." John's hand tightened on his sidearm, though not out of fear, out of confusion. He had been called many things in his life: soldier, captain, killer, survivor. But never anything like this. He opened his mouth, searching for the right words, but none came. She stepped closer, moving carefully like a pilgrim approaching holy ground. Her expression trembled between joy and fear, as if his response could break her in half. Her voice wavered, but her meaning was strong. "I searched. I waited, the stars told me. You are chosen." John's chest ached. He had seen faces like hers before, on the battlefield, in refugee camps, in the eyes of those who begged him not to leave them behind. That same desperate hope, that same clinging belief that someone could save them. But he was not that man anymore. He swallowed hard, forcing steel into his voice. "I don't know what you think I am," he said, slow and firm. "But I'm no one's mate. I came here to rest. That's all." The words landed like stones. Her face broke. The fire in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a flicker of pain so raw it almost made him look away. Her lips trembled, but she did not argue. She only whispered, as if to herself, "If you turn away, I have nothing." John felt the weight of her words like chains around his heart. For a heartbeat he wanted to reach out, to tell her something gentle, to offer even the smallest comfort. But he clenched his fists and stepped back. He turned, walking toward the outpost. Every step felt heavier than the last. Behind him the forest remained silent. The girl did not follow, but her golden eyes lingered in his mind, bright and unshakable, long after the night had swallowed her figure whole. John Carver told himself he wanted only rest. That this was not his fight, that he could not afford to carry another soul on his weary shoulders. But deep down, in the quiet corners of his heart, he already knew. This was no simple meeting. Something had begun. John Carver did not sleep that night. He sat in the guard tower, staring at the forest, waiting to see those golden eyes again. But the trees swayed silently, glowing faintly as if nothing had happened. His mind was restless, replaying her words, her trembling voice, her desperate expression. Life mate. He didn't know what it meant in her language, but he felt the weight of it. It hadn't been casual. It wasn't a mistake. When she spoke, it was with the kind of certainty soldiers used when swearing an oath. It was a bond she believed was unbreakable, but John was tired of bonds. For too many years people had leaned on him, squad mates, captains, civilians, refugees. They had looked at him with hope, with fear, with need, and he had carried them because that was his duty. Because if he didn't, they would die. But each burden took a piece of him, and now there was almost nothing left. He had come here to rest, to let the galaxy forget his name. And yet, in one night, one stranger had dragged him back into chains he thought he'd escaped. The next morning, she returned. He found her waiting near the edge of the forest, standing tall despite the dew and the cold. She looked at him as if the night had never ended. Her eyes lit up when she saw him, a fragile spark of hope trying to survive the storm. John stopped a few paces away, crossing his arms. His voice was rough. "Why are you still here?" She pressed her hand against her chest just as before. "Because you are mine. My life mate." Her words were simple, but her tone shook. It was not a demand, not even a request. It was a declaration, the kind one made when the soul itself was on the line. John closed his eyes for a moment, steadying himself. He wanted to be kind, but kindness was dangerous. Kindness made people follow, and if she followed him, she would only end up hurt. He couldn't let that happen. "You don't understand," he said firmly. "I'm not who you think I am. I don't belong to anyone. I'm done with all of this. Whatever you believe, you're wrong. I can't give you what you're asking for." Her golden eyes widened and her lips parted in shock. He could see the shiver run through her body, like she had been struck. For a long moment, she just stared at him, unable to breathe. Finally, her voice broke. "If you turn away, I have nothing." The words cut deeper than any blade. John turned his head aside, jaw tight. He had heard that tone before, on battlefields, from soldiers who begged not to be abandoned, from children crying in ruins, from civilians who had no one left. It always sounded the same, raw, pleading, fragile. And every time he had answered the same way. He had carried them. He had stayed, but not this time. This time he forced his voice to turn cold. "Then you'll have to learn to live with nothing." The silence that followed was worse than a scream. Her body trembled and tears welled in those golden eyes, shining like broken light. She turned her face away quickly as if ashamed of her weakness. But John saw it, saw the way her shoulders shook, saw how tightly she clenched her hands to keep from falling apart. He almost reached out. Almost. His hand twitched by his side, aching to touch her shoulder, to offer even the smallest comfort. But he stopped himself, because if he gave her even that, she would cling harder. And he could not let himself be needed again. Without another word, he turned and walked away, his boots crunching against the dirt. Every step felt heavier, as if his own body wanted to drag him back. He didn't look over his shoulder. He didn't dare. Back at the outpost, he sat alone in his quarters, staring at the wall. The silence he once loved now felt hollow, pressing down on him like a weight. He told himself he had done the right thing. He told himself she would leave, forget him, find her path somewhere else. But when night fell, he looked again toward the glowing forest. And though the trees swayed and the insects hummed, he couldn't shake the image of her face, those golden eyes filled with pain, that trembling whisper of a girl who had declared him her life mate. He closed his eyes and muttered to himself almost angrily, "I came here to rest. Nothing more." But deep inside, in the place he tried hardest to bury, a quiet voice whispered, "Then why does it hurt so much to turn her away?" John Carver thought she would leave. After he refused her, after he spoke the words meant to cut her away, he thought she would vanish back into the glowing forest. He thought he would never see those golden eyes again. It would hurt for a few nights, perhaps, but then silence would return, and he could bury the memory under routine. But she did not leave. The next morning, she was there again, waiting near the tree line, her copper hair catching the sunlight, her silver skin glowing faintly like dew. She did not speak this time. She only stood, watching him as if her presence alone was enough. John ignored her, or at least he tried to. He made his patrol, checked the perimeter, and filled out his reports with the same stiff handwriting as always. But every time he glanced toward the forest, she was there, unmoving, waiting. Days passed. She still did not go. John began to ask questions. He called one of the translators from the supply ship and demanded to know what life mate truly meant in her culture. The translator hesitated before answering, as if the word itself carried weight. "She has chosen you," the translator said softly. "For her people, that vow is sacred. Once spoken, it cannot be taken back. She will not leave. To her, you are destiny." John felt a chill creep into his chest. Destiny. He hated that word. He had seen too many lives broken in the name of destiny. Too many young soldiers told it was their fate to die. He wanted nothing to do with it, and yet, she stayed. He watched her from the guard tower at night. She no longer tried to speak to him. She simply waited, a silent figure by the glowing trees. She refused food from her own kind. He could see her frame growing thinner, her cheeks more hollow, and yet her eyes never lost that fire. It was as if she was saying, "I will wait until the stars burn out, but I will not leave you." The sight tore at him in ways the battlefield never had. John told himself she was a fool, that she was wasting her life chasing something broken, something empty. He told himself it was better if she gave up, better if she saw the truth that he had nothing left to give her. He was no savior, no destiny. He was only a tired old soldier who wanted the galaxy to forget him. But every night when he lay down in his bunk, he could not shake the image of her standing in the rain, shivering, but unyielding. Her devotion was not loud, not dramatic. It was quiet, steady, unbreakable. And in its silence he found himself cracking. Memories came back. The orphans clinging to his hands on ruined streets. The soldiers who had followed his orders into fire, trusting him even when he doubted himself. The civilians who had stared at him as if his presence alone meant hope. He had carried them all because someone had to. And though it had nearly broken him, part of him knew he had never been able to walk away. Now, once more someone was waiting, one night. After hours of staring into the dark, John muttered aloud as if to the empty air, "Why me? Why not anyone else?" But the silence gave no answer. Only the faint glow of the trees and her figure still waiting beneath them, patient as the stars. The truth he did not want to face was simple. She was not a burden. She was not dragging him back into war. She was giving him something else, something he had thought lost forever. A reason. He clenched his fists, fighting it, trying to bury the thought. He told himself again and again, "I only wanted rest. I cannot carry another soul," but his heart betrayed him. Each day it grew harder to look at her suffering without moving, harder to pretend he felt nothing. John Carver, the tired soldier who had sworn to live in silence, was beginning to realize the silence itself was killing him. And whether he admitted it or not, the bond he didn't want was already forming, thread by thread, each one woven by her stubborn devotion. The first warning came as a low hum on the scanners. John Carver sat in the watchtower, staring at the blinking red light. For months the screens had been silent, showing only the empty sky and quiet forest. But now a ripple of movement crossed the display, ships, small and fast, cutting through the atmosphere like knives. Raiders, not soldiers, not organized armies, just desperate scavengers, mercenaries with no flag but greed. They came like vultures searching for easy prey, striking at weak outposts far from patrol routes, and the frontier was always weak. John's jaw tightened. He pressed the alarm and the siren wailed across the outpost, shattering the silence. Lights flickered on in the barracks. Half-trained recruits stumbling from their bunks, panic written on their young faces. Most had never seen combat. "Positions!" John barked, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of war. The soldiers snapped to attention, fear sharpening into focus at his command. Even after all these years, he knew how to make men move. He armed himself quickly. His old rifle felt heavy in his hands, but familiar, like an extension of his body. As he checked the charge, movement at the tree line caught his eye. She was there. The alien girl, silver-skinned, copper-haired, golden-eyed. She had heard the sirens, yet she did not run. She walked toward him, steady as the storm gathered overhead. "You fight," she whispered when she reached him. "Then I fight." John stared at her, heart hammering. He should have told her no. He should have ordered her back to the safety of her people. She had no weapon, no armor, no training, but when he opened his mouth the words died, because her eyes held no fear, only fire. The ship screamed overhead, engines burning trails of light through the night. Raiders poured from their dropships, armored and armed with jagged weapons. The first shots tore through the air, shattering walls and throwing sparks. The recruits panicked, some firing blindly, others ducking for cover. John stepped forward. His voice cut through the chaos like thunder. "Hold the line. Aim, breathe, fire." And they obeyed. The battlefield lit up with flashes of plasma and tracer fire. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air. Raiders fell, but more kept coming, swarming like hungry wolves. The outpost shook under the storm. Through it all, she remained by John's side. She moved where he moved, ducked when he ducked, her golden eyes fixed on him like a beacon. She had no rifle, but when a raider charged close with a blade, she threw herself at him. knocking him off balance long enough for John to fire. Her body was frail compared to his, but her courage was unshakable. "Why?" John shouted between bursts of gunfire. "Why won't you leave?" She looked at him breathless, her silver skin streaked with dirt and blood. "Because where you stand, there I stand. Life mate." The word struck him harder than any blow. The battle raged for hours, though it felt like days. John fought until his arms trembled, until his chest burned with fire. He moved like the soldier he had once been, barking orders, rallying the young recruits, cutting down raiders one after another. He thought he had left that man behind, but tonight that man returned, and every time he faltered, she was there. Her voice steady, her eyes fierce, not pulling him into war, but standing with him in it. At last, the raiders broke. Their leader fell, and the survivors fled to their ships, engines screaming as they retreated into the night sky. Silence fell again, broken only by the crackle of flames and the groans of the wounded. John lowered his rifle, his body shaking. Blood seeped from a gash in his side, and his knees buckled. The recruits rushed to help, but she was faster. She caught him before he hit the ground, her arms surprisingly strong as she held him. "Rest," she whispered, her voice trembling now with fear and relief. "I have you." John looked up at her, golden eyes shining in the smoke, and for the first time he saw her not as a burden, but as strength. She was not chaining him. She was lifting him. And as the storm faded into silence, John Carver realized he no longer stood alone. The battlefield was quiet now. Smoke curled upward from the ruined walls of the outpost, carrying with it the heavy smell of burned metal and blood. The recruits moved among the wreckage, their faces pale, their hands shaking as they dragged the wounded to safety. For many it was their first taste of war, and though they had survived, their innocence was gone. John Carver lay on a stretcher inside the infirmary, his side bandaged, but still burning with pain. He hated the feeling of lying still, hated being the one carried instead of carrying others, but his body had reached its limit. He had fought as if the years had fallen away, and now the years had come crashing back with double weight. Through the haze of exhaustion, he became aware of a presence beside him. She was there. The alien girl had not left his side since the last shot was fired. Her silver skin was streaked with grime, her copper hair tangled with smoke, but her golden eyes still burned with that same fierce light. She sat close, holding his hand in both of hers, as if afraid he might vanish if she let go. "You should rest," John muttered, his voice rough. Her head shook. "I rest when you rest." He tried to look away, but her grip was steady, unyielding. The recruits glanced at them with curiosity, whispering quietly, but John barely noticed. His world had narrowed to her, the girl who had stood with him in the fire, who had thrown herself into danger without hesitation. For a long time, silence stretched between them. Finally, John spoke, his words slow, almost bitter. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to fight again." Her eyes softened, and she leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "I did not ask you to fight. I only asked you to see me." John felt his chest tighten. He thought of the years behind him, endless battles, endless losses. He thought of the promises he had made to himself. No more bonds, no more burdens. And yet here she was, refusing to let go, refusing to let him fade into the silence he thought he desired. "You don't understand," he said, his voice cracking. "I came here to be forgotten. To rest. I can't carry another soul on my shoulders. I don't have anything left." She reached out, touching his scarred face gently, as if each line of pain was something precious. "Then don't carry me," she said. "Stand with me. Rest with me. I will guard your heart as you guarded mine." The words struck him harder than any oath. They were clumsy in human tongue, but the meaning was clear. She wasn't asking him to be a soldier or a savior or even strong. She was asking him to be hers. For a long time, John said nothing. His mind battled itself, torn between fear and longing. Part of him screamed to push her away, to protect her from the ruin that always followed him. But another part, the part he had buried under years of silence, wanted to believe her. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could rest not in solitude but in connection. Finally, he whispered, almost to himself, "Why me? Why choose me?" Her golden eyes filled with tears, but her smile was steady. "Because my soul knows yours. Because when I saw you, I was no longer alone." John closed his eyes, and for the first time in years he let himself breathe. Not the sharp breaths of a soldier waiting for the next attack, but the slow, trembling breath of a man who wanted to live. The choice lay before him, simple yet heavier than any battle he had fought. To remain alone, bound only to silence and ghosts, or to step into the bond offered to him freely by someone who had chosen him without fear. When he opened his eyes again, she was still there, her hand still wrapped around his. She had not wavered, not for a moment. And in that unwavering devotion, John Carver felt something shift inside him. He realized that perhaps rest was never meant to be found in solitude. Perhaps rest was meant to be shared. The stars were clear that night. The smoke from the battle had drifted away and the sky stretched wide and endless above the frontier outpost. John Carver stood outside the infirmary, his side still aching beneath the bandages, but he refused to stay in bed any longer. The air was cold, sharp against his skin, yet it carried a kind of peace he had not felt in years. Beside him she walked silently. The alien girl, his shadow, his constant presence. Her copper hair shimmered in the moonlight, her golden eyes never leaving him. She did not speak, but she didn't need to. Her presence said everything. I am here. I will not leave. They reached the guard tower. John paused at the base, leaning on the railing for support. For years he had climbed this tower to look out at the stars in solitude. Tonight, for the first time, he climbed it with someone else. At the top, the horizon stretched before them. The forest glowed faintly in the distance, its strange beauty unbroken by war. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence was no longer empty, it was shared. Finally, John turned to her. You should hate me, he said quietly. I tried to push you away. I told you I had nothing left. She tilted her head, her expression soft. I do not want what you cannot give. I only want what is true. John let out a rough laugh, though it carried no humor. Truth is, I'm tired. I've been tired for a long time. All I wanted was rest. That's why I came here. But rest? He looked down at his scarred hands, trembling faintly. Rest means nothing when you're alone. She reached for his hands, folding them gently in her own. Her touch was warm, steady, grounding. Then do not be alone. Rest with me. The words were simple, yet they cut straight through the walls he had built around his heart. John stared at her, searching her eyes for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign she would break if he leaned on her. But all he saw was fire, golden, unyielding, alive. She was not asking him to save her. She was not begging him to fight her battles. She was only asking him to stay. He thought of the faces he had carried through war, the brothers who never came home, the children who had clung to him, the soldiers who had trusted him to lead. He had carried them because he had to. But this was different. This was not duty. This was choice. For the first time in decades, John Carver allowed himself to choose for himself. His voice was rough, almost breaking. If you want me... He paused, the words heavy on his tongue. But then you've got me. For life. Her breath caught and tears welled in her golden eyes. Not tears of sorrow, tears of joy, pure and unshakable. She pressed her forehead to his, her hand still wrapped around his, and whispered the words she had carried from the beginning. Life mate. And this time, John did not turn away. He held her, not as a soldier protecting the weak, but as a man accepting the bond freely offered to him. For the first time, the ghosts in his chest felt lighter. The silence in his heart no longer echoed. It was filled with her. The recruits below whispered among themselves, watching the strange pair at the top of the tower. Some saw a legend, others saw a mystery, but John Carver no longer cared what they saw. For him, the war was over. The endless wandering was over. He had found rest, not in solitude, not in forgetting, but in being remembered, in being chosen. As the stars burned quietly above and the forest glowed below, John realized that the peace he had been chasing his whole life was not silence at all. It was this moment, this bond, this promise. The tired soldier had finally laid down his weapon, and in the arms of the one who had never given up on him, John Carver found his home. Forever.